The lights came up on cue. The audience clapped, not because they were surprised, but because they were supposed to. Jimmy Kimmel walked out with a grin that had been shaped by 15 years of routine. He hit the marks. Monologue. Punchlines. Winks to camera 3. Everything moved the way it was designed to. Polished, safe, frictionless. But Jimmy's timing was off by half a second. His rhythm lagged beneath the jokes. Not enough to ruin them. Just enough to feel rehearsed. Because Jimmy wasn't thinking about the jokes. He was thinking about who was sitting behind the curtain. Tom Hardy, a guest he had requested, but not for laughs. Tom had a new film out, but it wasn't built for promotion. It was heavy, personal, quiet, and Tom had made it clear before agreeing to come. If I show up, I show up as me, not the version. The producers hadn't liked that. Jimmy hadn't either, but he had said yes. Now he wasn't sure why. The band faded. The applause signs dimmed, and Jimmy turned toward the curtain. All right, folks. My next guest has played masked villains, tortured heroes, and more grunting men than I can count. But tonight, he's here, live, in person, and hopefully speaking in full sentences. Please welcome Tom Hardy. The curtain opened. Tom walked out slow, not reluctant, just deliberate. He wore black, not sharp, not casual, just unremarkable enough to keep the focus on what he might say. He shook Jimmy's hand once. No smile. Then sat. The crowd applauded harder than usual, overcompensating for the stillness they didn't expect. Jimmy leaned in, smiling like always. Tom, you're one of the most intense people to sit in that chair. I feel like I should be bracing for something. Tom didn't blink. You don't need to brace. You just need to stop trying to steer. Jimmy laughed, half a beat too long. All right, we're jumping in, I see. Tom sat still. I didn't come here to float. The laughter dipped. Jimmy reached for a card. Okay, let's start with the film. It's getting strong reviews. Critics are calling it your most vulnerable role. Would you agree with that? Tom answered plainly. It's the first time I didn't play a character. Just a version of the part one usually hide. Jimmy looked up. That sounds heavy. Tom didn't smile. Not heavy, just honest. They feel the same when you're not used to either. That line didn't get a laugh. It didn't even get a breath. It just sat in the room and made the laughter from 2 minutes ago feel like it came from a different building. Jimmy flipped to the next card. He didn't read it. He just said, So, are we having that kind of conversation tonight? Tom nodded once. If we're going to talk, let's not pretend it's banter. And just like that, the rhythm cracked. This wasn't going to be safe. It wasn't going to be easy. It was going to be real, and the room didn't know how to hold that yet. Jimmy shuffled the card in his hand. He didn't look at it. He didn't need to. It was already the wrong question. He tried to smile. So what are we talking about, Tom? If this isn't banter, what is it? Tom leaned back in the chair. Calm. Grounded. Maybe it's just a chance to speak without being flattened into something consumable. The audience was quiet now. Not uncomfortable. Just listening. In a way late night shows don't usually invite. Jimmy adjusted his posture. You think this format flattens people? Tom's voice didn't shift. I think most rooms are built to reward performance, but not presence. Jimmy nodded slowly. Well, then maybe we just try something new. Tom replied. Trying isn't the point. Staying is. Jimmy paused. He looked at the camera, then back at Tom. You know how this looks, right? You come in, all serious, no jokes, no charm. People might say you're being difficult. Tom didn't blink. I'm being still. If stillness makes a room defensive, maybe the noise wasn't honest to begin with. There it was. Not a punch. Not a push. Just weight. Enough to tilt the desk without raising a voice. Jimmy let the silence stretch. He glanced at his producer just off stage. No cue. No fix. The show was still live, but the format wasn't. He tried again. Let me ask you something real then. When you make these films, these dark, layered characters, do you ever worry it changes how people see you? Tom looked at him. Only when I think people mistake the work for the mask, and the interviews for permission. Jimmy tilted his head. Permission for what? For the audience to stop listening the moment I don't make them laugh. That landed. Too clean. Too sharp. And suddenly, Jimmy knew. The guest wasn't building tension. He was naming it. The audience sat forward. Not drawn by spectacle. Just witnessing. Because Tom Hardy wasn't clashing with the host. He was refusing to bend. And the longer he stayed still, the more obvious it became. Jimmy Kimmel wasn't in charge of the room anymore. Jimmy sat forward. A little tighter now. A little less showman, a little more man. He said, Tom, I've interviewed a lot of people. But this feels like something else. Tom looked at him. Maybe it's just what happens when someone doesn't show up to play a version of themselves. Jimmy exhaled, trying to keep it light. You know the audience tunes in for stories. Behind the scenes. Set mishaps. A little charm. A little dirt. Tom stayed still. Then maybe they've been trained to expect surface, not substance. A quiet cough echoed from the second row. Not because of the line. Because someone forgot they were in a crowd. The air had changed. Jimmy tapped his pen once. You're intense, man. Tom didn't move. Intensity is what honesty looks like when it stops apologizing. The audience didn't clap. It wouldn't have felt right. Because this wasn't the kind of sentence meant to be decorated with sound. Jimmy leaned back. His grin faded without falling. You know, people are going to say this was you being combative. Tom answered calmly. No, this is me not performing civility in exchange for comfort. Jimmy nodded once. Just once. Then asked, why now? Tom looked toward the studio lights. Then said, because I've spent too many years answering questions designed to keep me safe. Tonight, I stopped needing safety from myself. The camera didn't cut away. Because no one in the booth wanted to miss what might come next. Jimmy took a longer breath. You know what people will say? That this wasn't entertainment. Tom looked at him. Then maybe it wasn't supposed to be. And for the first time in the segment, Jimmy had nothing to say back. He didn't toss to commercial. Didn't joke. Didn't deflect. He just sat in it. And the audience, following him more quietly than they ever had before, sat too. Jimmy Kimmel crossed one leg over the other. Not relaxed. Not casual. Just movement. He said, all right, let me ask it this way. What are you hoping happens when you sit like this, calm, still, and tense? What do you want the room to feel? Tom answered, the truth, and the discomfort that comes with not covering it in punchlines. Jimmy chuckled once. Short. Reflex, not rhythm. This is still a talk show, you know. Tom nodded. Then maybe it's time it remembered the talking part doesn't have to be noise. The band didn't shift. The crew didn't whisper. Even the stagehands were watching now. Because something in the room had slipped the leash. And no one wanted to be the first to pull it back. Jimmy leaned in again. You've done 100 interviews this year. You've been called a chameleon. A menace. A method actor who disappears. Are you trying to disappear now? Tom shook his head once. I'm trying to be seen without shape-shifting first. Jimmy sat back. That one hit. The crowd felt it too. A few heads nodded, slowly, like they'd just been let in on something no one had ever said on this stage. Jimmy tried again. You think people haven't seen you? You've been in the spotlight for years. Tom looked at him, voice steady. Being watched and being seen aren't the same. That line didn't land like a punch. It landed like a door unlocking. And Jimmy didn't reach for the next question. He just stayed still. The show wasn't over. But the format had unraveled. And now, for the first time, the audience wasn't waiting for the next bit. They were just waiting. For whatever this was. For what it might become. Jimmy shifted again. This time, it wasn't a choice. It was reaction. He tapped his pen twice. Then said, all right, I've got to ask. Do you even want to be here? Tom looked at him. If I didn't, I wouldn't be. Jimmy pressed. Then why come and break the rhythm? Why sit here and make the room feel like it's waiting for something that isn't going to happen? Tom stayed still. Because I'm tired of moments that pretend to be real but aren't allowed to breathe. Jimmy sat back, eyes narrowed slightly. You're making this harder than it has to be. Tom didn't blink. Maybe it was always supposed to be hard. It just got dressed up to look easy. The room tightened. Even the laughter diehards, the ones trained to chuckle on cue, stopped guessing. This wasn't a game anymore. Jimmy looked at the camera, then offstage, then back at Tom. You think this is brave? Tom answered calmly. I think it's necessary. And I think calling it brave is what people do when honesty makes them flinch. Jimmy leaned in, voice lower. This is a comedy show. You're supposed to come in, have a laugh, promote the movie, and keep it moving. Tom's voice didn't rise. Then maybe that's the problem. People show up to be heard and leave flattened into applause. Silence. Jimmy clenched the card in his hand. He wasn't smiling. Not anymore. The grin was gone, replaced by the recognition that something had broken, not violently, but absolutely. He said, "You came here knowing what kind of room this is." Tom nodded. "And I came anyway, because someone has to sit still long enough for the room to hear itself." The audience didn't move, because stillness was no longer a pause. It was the point. Jimmy set the cue card down, flat on the desk. No flip, no transition. He looked across the space between them and said, "You know what's crazy? You're not even angry." Tom replied, "No, I'm just not pretending I'm here for approval." Jimmy tried to lighten his tone. "But this is television, Tom. People come for stories, escape, entertainment." Tom sat forward slightly, just enough to let the words meet him. Then maybe they've forgotten what a person looks like when he doesn't trade reality for applause. Jimmy's laugh was quiet, but this time it didn't mask anything. He said, "So what happens now? You going to walk off?" Tom shook his head. "No, I don't need to storm out. I'm just done offering versions of myself that make the room more comfortable." The audience stayed still. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the camera crew leaned just a little closer to their viewfinders, like the frame might hold something more if they just focused hard enough. Jimmy looked to the side. His producer mouthed something. He didn't respond. He just looked back at Tom and said, "Well, that's a hell of a thing to say in this chair." Tom replied, steady, "Then maybe this chair should remember what it was built to hold." Jimmy didn't try to close the show. He didn't summarize. He didn't rap. He just sat back in his chair and exhaled through his nose like someone realizing the moment had already finished and he hadn't gotten to shape it. Tom stood, buttoned his jacket. No nod to the audience. No goodbye. No gesture for effect. He walked off the stage without waiting for the music. The camera stayed wide. The red light didn't blink, and the room let him go. Backstage, a young segment producer looked up from her notes and whispered, "That wasn't a meltdown." Another replied, "No, that was what happens when someone shows up without asking to be clipped into a highlight reel." The episode aired uncut. No voiceover, no framing, no jokes, just a guest who came in still and left the room quieter than he found it. Clips spread slowly, not for shock, but because people weren't sure what they'd seen, only that it didn't need to be explained. One tweet read, "He didn't perform. That's what made it unforgettable." Another, "Tom Hardy didn't get kicked off. He just stopped fitting inside the frame." And somewhere in the writer's room the next day, Jimmy tapped a blank card against his desk and said quietly, "We didn't lose the moment. We just couldn't hold it." And no one disagreed. Because stillness, once seen, doesn't leave quietly. It lingers. It rewrites what the room thinks it can carry. And Tom Hardy, without rage, without theater, without apology, had walked in and left that stillness behind. Intact, complete, unmoved.